The Sikha we'll be learning is in the Sichas Chelik Chov Gimel, the second Sikha for Parshas Pinchas. In heintige Sender wird erzählt, as Moshe had gebeten beim Eibischen, Yifket Hashem Gemer Ish Alo Eda. In this week's Parsha, we learned that Moshe Rabbeinu asked Hashem that he should appoint a person, since he's going to pass away, he should appoint another person to be the leader for the community for the Eden. Und der Rebbe hat ihm gesagt, and Hashem said to Moshe, Kach lech as Yeshua ben Nun Gemer, take Yeshua, and you should put your hands on top of him, and you'll give him, so to speak, smicha. And the pasuk says Moshe did it. And Moshe put his hands on top of Yeshua, and that's how he appointed Yeshua to be his successor. Then the Rebbe says like this: but the Geya Minu Melech, concerning when you appoint a king, Shet and Rambam, the Rambam writes like this: when you make a king, when you appoint a king. Not that he is a son of a king before, but when you start off and you appoint a king, it has to be done only through the bezin of 70 skenim, 70 members of Sanhedrin. Valpinovi has to be a novi, and this is Ki Yeshua, like it happened by Yeshua. Sheminu Moshe Rabbeinu Bezdina, who appointed Yeshua, Moshe Rabbeinu, and his bezin. Moshe Rabbeinu was the novi, and the bezin is with the shivim skenim, and that's how Moshe Rabbeinu appointed Yeshua. So that's how you appoint, anytime you appoint a king. The fun is muchrach, from this is clear. And the Rambam halt as the meaning from Yeshua and Sheba Pashaseinu, that Yeshua was appointed, as the Torah in our Parsha tells us, is going on Inya for Minimalach, which was the concept of appointing a king. It was the same idea as appointing a king. So what Moshe Rabbeinu did, he appointed Yeshua as king. That's why, from the way it happened by Yeshua, we learn out by the other kings also. That from Verstehen, the Rebbe says we have to understand. The Rambam Alein Paskentol, the Rambam himself says in a different place, that when you appoint a king, you have to anoint him with the Shem Mishcha. The Shem Mishcha is the special oil made in a special way by Moshe Rabbeinu at the time of the Mishkan, under the auspices of Moshe Rabbeinu, and that's what they used to appoint the Kohen Gadol and to appoint the whole Mishkan, the Kelim, to anoint all these things, so that it all happened through the Shem Mishcha. And the Rambam says, well, when you appoint a king, you have to also put on him the Shem Mishcha. So if so, Farvos gefindt man nit as Moshe Rabbeinu soll Moshe sein Yeshua und bis Shem Mishcha. If we say that Moshe appointed Yeshua, that's the idea of appointing a king, why don't we find that he used the Shem Mishcha to anoint him through the Shem Mishcha, like you have to anoint every king? Even though by Moshe Rabbeinu himself, we don't find that he was anointed with the Shem Mishcha. Hagamas Moshe Rabbeinu melech hoyevi the Rambam paskent. Even though the Rambam says that Moshe Rabbeinu was a melech, so we could about the same question: why wasn't Moshe Rabbeinu himself anointed with Shem Mishcha? He's aber Moshe Rabbeinu given a melech. Eides is given the tzibur from Dinei melech and Shem Mishcha. It's no kasha. Moshe Rabbeinu became king, or became the leader, which is like a king, as the Rambam paskens. That happened before there was a din of all the details how you appoint a melech, and one of them is that you have to use the Shem Mishcha. So he was appointed before that din, but Yeshua was appointed already after there was a din of Shem Mishcha. So then how come by him we don't find that Moshe Rabbeinu used the Shem Mishcha? The Chura we can't answer, we could answer like this. Like noch a psak from Rambam, based on a different halacha that the Rambam said. The Rambam says, Ein Meshchemen for Shem Mishcha the Deiris, Elo Malchus Beis David. That in order to use the Shem Mishcha to anoint a king only is if you are a king from the dynasty of David HaMelech. The Balai Yeshua and Yigiven from Malchus Beis David, since Yeshua was not from the dynasty of David, that's why they didn't use the Shem Mishcha, because the Rambam himself said it's only for Malchus Beis David. But the Rebbe said it's not true. He's over Adarabah, the Chittas Rambam was not contented. Actually, according to the Rambam himself, this is not a good answer. Because as a source that when you appoint a king, you have to use the Shem Mishcha, the Rambam, then posik. Where does the Rambam learn it from? So he says, I have a posik. The posik says, that Shmuel, when he anointed Shaul HaMelech as king, he used the Shem Mishcha. So, was retzich wegen der Mashiach for Shaul? They were talking about anointing Shaul. Was is nie given from the Malchus Beis David. Shaul was not one of the dynasty of David. And nevertheless, the Rambam brings that Shmuel HaNovi anointed him with the Shem Mishcha. And that's the source that you have to anoint the king with Shem Mishcha. From there we see that the Rambam halt a Shol is nicht geworden mit Shemen HaMishcha. So the Rambam holds that Shol did get the Shemen HaMishcha because that's the whole source of the din. So since the Rambam says that Shol had the Shemen HaMishcha, they anointed him with the Shemen HaMishcha. Therefore, from that is clear. Those for the Rambam schreibt, Kishmamidim Melech Meishchnes b'Shemen HaMishcha, that when the Rambam writes that when you anoint the king, you have to anoint him with the Shemen HaMishcha, meinter damit jeden Melech, afil nicht vom Malchus bis David. Hitake means every king. We said maybe a svara that only if you're from the dynasty of David. But here we see clearly that Rambam holds that every king, not only the dynasty of David. The Lashon Rambam is, as I said before, when you anoint a king, so you have to have Shemen HaMishcha. That's what the Rambam says. Look back before. It says, when you appoint the king, and he says it's Stam. It doesn't say only special kings. So Asima the Rambam holds that every king that's anointed has to be anointed Shemen HaMishcha. But how could we say that? The Rambam himself, we said before, you only use Shemen HaMishcha for the dynasty of David. So the Rebbe explains. Und das was pasken, das Meshcha on the day that Malchus bis David. And this the Rambam says that you only use the Shemen HaMishcha L'deiris for all generations, only if you were from the dynasty of David. That's only after David HaMelech. Because Rambam says that when David HaMelech was anointed, became king, he was Zeichet. The real king is David HaMelech and all his descendants afterwards. So, and that's forever. So when the Rambam says that you only use the Shemen HaMishcha for the dynasty of David, it's only after David. But before David, every king had to have Shemen HaMishcha, because Be'etzem, every king has Shemen HaMishcha. But since after David, he became the king, and his dynasty became the true dynasty, it's only used for him. But it's Be'etzem Adin in every king. Later on, the real king is from David. So it comes out anything before David, the Rambam holds you have to use Shemen HaMishcha. But the Kushel Duchter, so the Kasha comes back. Aber was gefindt man nicht, als man dat Yeshua und welches gonna Melech Shittas Rambam Meshach ve Shemen HaMishcha. So the Kasha comes back. Why don't we find that Yeshua, which was a Melech, as we quoted from the Rambam before, that he had the din of a Melech, why weren't they Meshachim? Why weren't they anointed? They anointed him with Shemen HaMishcha. Punkt wie hat Meshach ve Shol das Rambam. Just like the Rambam holds that Shol a Melech. They anointed with Shemen HaMishcha, as we said before. That seems from the Rambam. So why didn't they do that to Yeshua, who was also a din of a Melech? That das verstehen, the Rebbe says, I'll explain this, this will be understood by Hagdem Abir and Dibra Medrash, by first bringing in what the Medrash says, if the was Moshe Rabbeinu had gesagt, and this Inyan that Moshe Rabbeinu said to Hashem, Yifket Hashem, that Hashem should appoint somebody. So it says in Medrash, that what did Moshe really mean when he said to the Eibush to please appoint somebody instead of me? As Moshe had gerechen sheyor shebonai as gveit kvedi ugdolosi, that Moshe Rabbeinu thought that his children are going to inherit his honor, or a different case of Yitzhak, his greatness. What the Leib him gesagt. So he asked, as if saying, I want one of my children should take over. And the Leib told him, there's a posik in Mishle, which says, the one that watches the tree, the fig tree, he eats the fruit. The one that takes care of it, he eats the fruit. That means that the one that took care of the Torah will be the one to be the one instead of Moshe Rabbeinu. That means, as the Medrash says, but Necha Yoshua v'lehem v'leoska b'Torah, David told Moshe, your children sat and didn't learn Torah, so they can't do it. But Yeshua, hail v'hu sharsocha b'chol keiches, since Yeshua served you with all his might, kedayu isha yishames Yisrael, so he should also be the one to serve Eden. So here we see that Moshe Rabbeinu wanted his children should take over, but the Eibush told them since they did not get involved in Torah, therefore it's not them, it's going to be Yeshua. That's the message. The Rebbe asks Akasha, since the children of Moshe sat and did not get involved in Torah, wie kommt es as Moshe hat melchatchila gemeint as Yosha bon Yaskvedi? How did Moshe lechatchila think that his children could take over? The Pashas of you can't verantworten. Simply, you could answer, but the Moshe asked that David should appoint somebody on the Eden, and he had in mind his children. But Moshe gemeint nit as ish was a learner Torah mit Eden. He didn't mean the person should take over the position of teaching him Torah. The Rabbi came in Furishes by Bakoshet. All he asked for, as it says clearly in his request, he asked Amelech that David should appoint a king. That should go out in front of them, come back in front of them, which means they should take this new person that he's asking for should take him to war. And therefore Moshe thought, as my children should get Yash and inherit my honor. Even though they didn't learn Torah so much, but the din is as a Malchus Yerusha, just as a Melech. A Melech has a job of leading the country, not with Torah. So and this is what he meant when he asked they should take over. And that he expected his son should take over, one of his sons should take over, because Malchus is a Yerusha, is an inheritance. So that's what he asked for. So we understand, according to this, we understand why he asked that, because he didn't mean he should take over in the concept of Torah, but take over in the concept of Anhagi, of running the Yidden, leading them. But if that's what Moshe Rabbeinu asked for, so we don't understand. So what was David's answer? He said, why can't I give it to your sons? Because it says the one that guards the tree, he eats the fruit. And therefore, and your children did not learn Torah. That's why they don't get the job. But what kind of answer is that? What Moshe asked had nothing to do with Torah. He didn't ask, he didn't mention Torah. We're talking, Moshe asked somebody, and which meant one of his sons should take over the Malchus, the running of the government, being the king. And that has nothing to do with Torah. So what's David's answer? Your children didn't learn Torah. So the Rebbe says like this. There's a way we could answer the kasha. The Megala Mukas is Mavayim Kefel Alosh in the Posik. The Megala Mukas explains the double expression in Posik. The Posik says Moshe asked that should be somebody Asher Yetzel Lifneim, Asher Yovel Lifneim. He should go out in front of them, come in front of them. And then the Torah repeats again. Moshe repeated again, Vasha Yetziyim, Vasha Yeviyim, that he should take him out and bring him in. So why did Moshe Rabbeinu say it twice? So the Megala Mukas says, as Moshe had gewollt as Zayin, Shnei Bonim Bnei Adam HaManhigim. Moshe Take wanted there should be two people appointed to run the Yidden. The Hainu Ish Echad Alayda Asher Yetzel Lifnei B'Molchama. One person should go in front of them and come back, and he should run when it comes to war and things similar to that. And Ish Echad Asher Yetziyim B'Torah. One person should deal with them, take him out, meaning in Torah. And that's why he said the double expression should be two people. Und der Eibishter hat ihm geantwortet, and the Eibishter answered, that's what the Megala Mukas says, she'echad yenegesem. Only one person will be the leader. Yeshua she'yi melech v'av besen shel Yisrael v'chochma shalom b'Torah. I want you to point to Yeshua. He will be both. The both things that you said, he will be both. He will be the king, Malchus, which is running the country, running the Eden, and he'll be the Av Besen. The Av Besen means the one that has to do with the Torah, and he's the Chochem Shalem b'Torah. He's the Chochem of Torah. And the Eibishter said, why? That's what, and the Megala Mukas says, why can't he have two? But we know you can't have two kings with one crown. Only one leader to the generation, not two. So the Moshe Rabbeinu asked there should be two people, and the Eibishter said, no, there only can be one for both. So if we learn like in Megala Mukas, we understand Pshat in that Medrash. What did the Medrash say? That Moshe asked his child, one of his children should take over, and David just said he didn't learn Torah. And the Kasha we asked, but he didn't ask that they should take over in Torah, should take over in Malchus. So what's the answer? That they didn't learn Torah? Now we understand. The Baal that Moshe had gemeint as Zayin Tzvei Manhigim, since Moshe thought there'd be two leaders, one would be the king, to run as a king supposed to run the country, and in this case to run the Eden. Another one will be the Abbezin, the teacher, so to speak. Their father is by Imuz Gekum, and that's why he thought that one of his children could take over the Yerusha, could inherit from him the Malchus, because he thought there'll be two. So Yitaka didn't ask for both. He asked there should be one of my children should take over the Malchus, because he thought there would be two. The Eibishter wanted should be only one to lead. That one person should be side the king in Malchus and side the leader in Torah. They're Avbezn. And in order to take over the Torah, the Yonim of Torah, you have to be worthy. Only the one that guards it, like it's a motion, the one that guards the tree, the fig tree, he eats from it. In other words, the one that learned Torah could lead in Torah. And his children were not fit. So they couldn't yashin. Moshe, the question was, what did Moshe think, and what did Eibishter answer him? That's Moshe thought it'll be two, so one of the two positions he felt could go to one of his children. The other one, Taka, he knew you can. And Eibishter answered him, that's not two positions. These are two things, two positions really, but not for two people. And it has to be one that fits for both. And since your children don't fit to one of them, to the Torah, so you can't take the other because it goes together. But Dafka Yeshua was given Ibrigem to Torah. Only Yeshua was given over to Torah. Need place to limit that Torah, not only learning Torah, but also serving Torah, being the one that took care of the side things, being there around Moshe Rabbeinu in the Yonim of Torah. But he can't say he only is the only person that could be the successor of Moshe Rabbeinu because he has Torah. Also, so maybe he could be both. And now we understand what Moshe had in mind and what they answered him. Therefore, we verstehen, Pirish Megal Amukis, the Rebbe says, we have to understand, according to Pshat, the Megal Amukis says, we have to understand the time for what the Rebbe should not ungenommen, this Wort for Moshe, Shiush, Neben, the other man higim. Why Take did they not accept Moshe's Wort? There should be two separate people. The Chure, Alpha as Leib Melochem, base Melochem, she Shtamshe Bekeser Echad, even though the Rebbe gave him the reason you can't have two kings using one crown, but that seemingly doesn't fit here. You don't have Gosha Bekeser Echad. That's only if they both have the same crown, the one crown. And here we're talking about two separate crowns, so to speak, two separate positions. If two to have the same position, meaning the same crown, you can't. But why does it the same crown? We're talking about two separate positions. Another kasha. We find that in later generation actually was that. Malchus durch ein Mannig und der Abbesten Shisrael als zweiter Mannig. The government running the Malchus was stuck one person was leading it. And the Abbezen, the leader of the Torah, was like another person. That was to prove that it could be. And the question is why David didn't accept it should be. We know not only because the answer David gave because it's one crown is not understood because it's not one crown, but Lepel we see it happen. The Manik B'Torah, the one that led the Eden in Torah. And as the Rama uses the Lashon that you have a Sanhedrin, for the Chaver Sanhedrin, you have the members of the Sanhedrin, and the greatest one in Chachmim, they make him the head. This is what the Chachamim called the Nosi. And he was in the place of Moshe Rabbeinu. So in the later generations, they had one person who was the head of the Sanhedrin, and he was the leader in Torah. And there was always another person, a king, who took him out and led them. Which he was the leader in the needs of the people. Not only were there two people, you had to have two people. The king, who was the king running the country, was not even allowed to be a member of the Sanhedrin. The Rambam says, you can't put in a king in amongst the Sanhedrin. So there were two people. That's what there were two. So there had to be two. So what was David's answer? No, Moshe Rabbeinu thought it'll be two. David said, no, it can't be two. It has to be one. Why? What's wrong with being two? And we see it was worth it worked. So we have to say, as he and this is the answer. Since the Malchus and the Torah are two different type of positions, the father says, it's not another contradiction to having to this rule that you could only have one leader. Forget, we see from here that you could have two leaders. And it's no problem with saying you have one crown, because that's not one crown. And even though there's a rule, you only have one leader, but that's in the same position, you can't have two leaders. And that's why the Taka were two leaders in the later generations. But if it comes out from here that you could have, so we're back to the question. So why when Moshe Rabbeinu asked the Eibishter to appoint one of his children, thinking that there will be two, why talking that? Here we see that what the Eibishter answered, that you can't have two at the same position. It's not the same position. And we see it was. So why wasn't it possible then? And why did it happen? The Eibishter said there has to be one person, and that's going to be Yeshua. Why can't you have two? Rabbi says the explanation is like this. He's an Akdom the Sefer Hayad, schreibt the Rambam, in the Hagdom, in the introduction to the Sefer of the Rambam called the Yad HaChazaka, the Rambam writes from Seder HaMaseder from Teresh Baal Peh, Fun Meishem Mizravashe. The Seder of the tradition of giving over of the oral Torah from Moshe Rabbeinu till Ravashe, who was the end, who finished writing the Gemara. And when the Rambam mentions those who received the recipients of the Torah, of the tradition, is the Rambam Medayik B'Shenei. So the Rambam, if you look at all the people, and he mentions one, this one took from this one, this one took from this one, this one took from one. The Rambam says, as plainly at Makabel given from the Friedrich Makabel Bezdinei, that this one received from the one before and his Bezdin. Or the Chaveira Shalom Makabel Mekedim. Or his Bezdin, he said, or it says from this person was Makabel from the one before and his friends, or and his Bezdin. Why does the Rambam write that? Why doesn't it just say the name? He was Makabel from him. He was Makabel. The Rambam is Mavayber Makamacha. The Rambam in a different place. In the letter, the Rambam writes, Ademita to give out Matkizan, that he wanted to stress as Hakabola Rabim Leib Yochi, that when one received from the one before, it wasn't one from one, it was a Rabbi. A whole group received from a group before, which makes it much stronger. Like this, if it's one from one, and that's all it is, maybe the one didn't understand. But if you say it's a whole group, it's a whole bezin, a whole group, so then it makes it much stronger. And that's what the Rambam writes, that this person was makabel from the one before and his bezin. And then the next one, he says, and the next person was makabel from the one before and his bezin or his friends. You think in them, we find one exception. But negates Yeshua. When he mentions Yeshua received from Moshe Rabbeinu, he makes it different. With the Rambam is Mishane, he changes. Umadayak, and he's Madayak Uskenim Rabbin Kibul Mi Yeshua. We know the Skenim received the tradition from Yeshua. So the Rambam writes, many Skenim received from Yeshua. When he's not Meisiv or Beis Dinicates, and he doesn't add from Yeshua and his Bezdin. But in everyone else, the Rambam writes, he received it from this and this person and his Bezdin. Why doesn't he write in Yeshua? Und der Kamachilik ist verstandig von dem Rambam dort nicht. And to understand why Hakahiri changes it, we'll understand looking at what the Rambam writes before. The Rambam writes before like this: Teira Shabbat Lom the Moshe Rabbeinu Kula Bezdin Lishim Eskenim. Lim the Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe taught the Teira Shabbat in his Bezdin to the 70 Skenim, and he adds, and Elazar Pinchas and Yeshua Shloshtem Kibul Moshe, and Elazar and Pinchas and Yeshua, all three received it from Moshe. Ule Yeshua Shu Talmidei Shemesh Rabbeinu Mosar Teira Sheba'al Peh B'Tzivah Olav. And Benegei Yeshua, the Rambam makes it a little bit different. He adds that Yeshua, who was the Talmud student of Moshe Rabbeinu gave over the whole Teira Sheba'al Peh, and he commanded him concerning the Teira Sheba'al Peh. This haste means the Rambam is telling us, as the Yeshua is given, nit nor a makabel for Moshe Rabbeinu v'Elazar Pinchas v'Shivim Skenim, that Yeshua was not like a regular makabel, the one that received the tradition from Moshe Rabbeinu, like the Rambam says that Elazar and Pinchas and the 70 Skenim received. It's not only Yeshua, was more than that. So Yeshua dafkot Moshe given Teira Sheba'al Peh kula. To Yeshua himself, Moshe gave the whole Teira. Like it says in the beginning of Pirkei Avos, Moshe kibul Teira Messina Mesarel Yeshua. That Moshe received the Teira in Sinai and gave it to Yeshua. And he got a special commandment. And he commanded Yeshua separate. So Yeshua was a separate category, a separate type. And the far Zoknet Rambam Bezdin by Yeshua. That's why when he says that the next generation who received from Yeshua, it doesn't say that he received from Yeshua and his Bezdin. But when it gets a Mesiras HaTeira, because in the concept of giving over the Teira, the next generation is the Kabbalah given from Yeshua Lein Take, the next generation received it from Yeshua himself, not Sam at Moshe given Teira Sheba'al, because he is the only one, like the Rambam himself, that Moshe, who was the only one received from Hashem, gave it over to Yeshua as the only one. Come to so when you say this, comes out as I say, so it comes out, there's a big difference between Moshe and Yeshua on one hand, compared to the head of the Sanhedrin in the later generations. Every generation, the Sanhedrin, people of Sanhedrin received the Torah from the generation before. But the way Moshe and Yeshua were is different in the next generation. And he explains what he means. Yeshua and Moshe Rabbeinu saying gleich in them. Yeshua and Moshe are equal in this idea, but the Messiah from ganz Teira Sheba'al Peh is given zu und von jeder für sie allein. Teira Sheba'al Peh was given over orally to Moshe himself, and Moshe gave it over to Yeshua himself. On the other hand, in later, after that, when we said there is somebody in the place of Moshe, the head of the Sanhedrin, is as in them prat, but Keshem, it's only not in every, not the prat, he gave it over each person, next generation. He is the one that receives the Torah himself. It's different. Only Moshe received from Hashem himself, Yeshua received from Moshe, but the next generation is not only in one detail. But Keshem and Moshe given al Gabeim from the Shivim Skenim. Means like just like when the Rambam does compare the Nasi of the later generations, everyone is like Moshe Rabbeinu, but it's only in one detail. That just like Moshe Rabbeinu, he was a member of the Sanhedrin, but he was the top of them. So every generation, he's like Moshe. He's the head and top of all the rest of the members of the Sanhedrin. Because we're talking about the one that was the greatest Chacham of them all, he got this title. So he was like Moshe in that idea, only that he's the head of the Sanhedrin. Aber in dem Inje von Mesiras HaTorah, but in the concept of receiving the tradition, the Torah, is nicht ein mit Achas Moshe Rabbeinu. It's not like Moshe Rabbeinu. Das geht durch dem ganzen Besten, Rabbi Merabin. So every generation, it's a whole group received from the group before, and the next group received from the group before. Rabbi Merabin, it come from the whole Besten. There's no one that has this idea of being the one that received the Torah himself. Only Moshe like that, and Yeshua like that. This is the difference between the later generations. When their Melech and Besten Shalisros and given zwei besondere Manhigim. Later generation that the two, the Melech who was in the Gashmasdiki things and running the government, running the people in their needs that they have, and the person who was the one that was the head of the Yonai Torah were two people. And that's why that's the difference between later generation and the Ma'afamesha and Yeshua. But Mesha Yeshua, he said, the Abisha said, no, it's going to be only one. And the question was, why only one? You see, later there were two. Why can't there be two here? Also, like Mesha Rabbeinu thought, there's a difference. What's the difference? Based on what we said before. Even though the head of the Sanhedrin is the highest level in the being appointed as a leader in the Yonah Torah, von dessen kommt nicht zu der Darge von Yeshua Shamelech. That person who became the head concerning a Yonim of Torah doesn't come to the level of the Nesias, of the leadership of a king. When the gather from Amelech is ein al gabav el Hashem alakov. A king is a person that doesn't have anybody on top, and no authority on top of him, but the Eibishter himself. When nit nor is ein lamayla men malchus, not only is there's nobody on top of him in his malchus, more than that, as far as leader, he's the only leader. Was darf mit keinem Litrechen doesn't have to take in consideration everybody else. Who can now, like we said before, there's only one leader. Is not the king is the only one. So the king, as a king, when we give him the title king, in the Malchus part, not in the Torah part, he's supposed to be the highest authority. Mashenka and Nosi Sanhedrin, but the Nosi of the Sanhedrin was Vibaldazar is einer from the Bezen Shalayin Aleph. He's a Bezen of 71. In other words, as we said before, he himself specifically is not the top. Moshe was the head. Yeshua was that's what they had, the Torah that was given to them. But all later generations, he was not the top. He was a member of the Sanhedrin. He was the best of them, the greatest. So he got the title from being the top. But he was only a member of 71 people. Now, Barel is the Gadol b'Chochma says, but because he was the greatest, the smartest one, the greatest Chocham, so he was the head of them. Isai Nesias nicht in dem Suk von Nesius Shel Melech. So the Nesias, the leadership of the Nosi Sanhedrin, is not in the same category as the leadership of the Melech. When the Rebbe is on Nosi Sanhedrin, it considered to Melech. That's why those times there was no contradiction that you have two, because they're two different. There's a Melech, he's one Inyan, and he's the head, and this Nosi is a different Inyan, and he's under the Melech tak as far as authority of being on top. But it's a separate thing. But Meilez is nit an Inyan for Shnei Melachim. So there's not two kings, only one king. There's only one king. And then there's another one, which is a different thing, which is not, it's not Shnei Daborim, it's not two leaders. Hashenkim b'Meisha v'Yeshua, but Meisha and Yeshua is Zeh, and Nesias b'Teirah b'Shnei Day, there were the Nesim and Teirah, like the later Sanhedrin, but in a different way. Nit nor in Zeh and Zayin Nosti Sanhedrin. They were not just the head of the Sanhedrin like any head of the Sanhedrin later on. Nureichen then was Meisha Kibbul Teirah Messina Misorah Yeshua. Meisha had the specialty that he received the Teirah himself. He gave it to Yeshua himself. When Azan Nesias b'Teirah, he's in the Darga Nesias from Melech. When you are in the level of heading in the Yonim Teirah, but in a way that you got the whole Teirah as an individual, who you are, that is equal to the Nesias of a Melech. When you're only part of the Sanhedrin were the ones that the Bezdin receives the Teirah from before, and the Bezdin is the special Bezdin. So even the Nosi of the Bezdin is not in the same darga as the Melech, because he's only a member of the Sanhedrin, and when he receives, and he's the head of what he got, goes together with the Bezdin. Like the Rama writes in all the cases that he received it, he and his Bezdin received it from the Bezdin before. But Moshe and Yeshua was different. By them, they were in the highest darga in Torah, but that was equal to the level of a Melech. Therefore, had we divided it into two, there will be one person concerning the wars, etc., and one person concerning the Torah. Then it would be considered two kings with one crown. Shnei daborim, there would be two leaders, and therefore the Eibusha said, Negeya to Yeshua, when Moshe Rabbeinu wanted that someone should take his place, and he said he thought that would be two people taking his place. Eibusha said, no, in this case, there's only one person, because if you'll have two, the head of Torah in that level of being the whole Torah, and being a melech, so they're two people, and they're both equal in level, that can be. That's what Abisha said, you only can have one. But then the Rebbe asked, the Soberit in ganzen movement still not understood. After all, even though they're both in the same height of level, in the level that they're reaching, but after all, they're two categories in leadership. One is taking him to war, etc., and one is in Torah. Now I'll see it like that before. So why should it be called two kings in one crown? The talking level, they would be the same, but after all, they're two separate jobs, two separate appointments. The Rebbe says the pshat is like this. Tafkid from Amel the Rambam, and it says, what is the mission of a king? What is the job of a king? So the Rambam says that his whole goal and his whole thought should be to elevate their true religion. And to fill up the world with righteousness. And to break the hands of the Rishoyim. And to fight the wars of Hashem. And the Rambam says, the whole purpose that we put in the king is to make mishpat, make justice, and to have the wars. Das heißt means like this. As Malchus by Yidden is in Yonah, nicht stammt zu versorgen der Mann mit Tzrochem HaGashmim. That when the Yid, by Yidden, we have a king, the purpose is not only, it's also, but not only to make sure the Yidden have all their physical needs. Because als hebt zichonen is verbunden mit Kiyum Ramas HaTeirah. It's all connected to Teirah. As we just read in the Rambam, Lohorim Dasem, as the whole purpose is to elevate the level of the religion, the true religion, which is Torah. To make sure that all the rules of the Torah are kept. Even the wars, which is what the Melech is supposed to do, is supposed to be Milchamas Hashem for the sake of Hashem. It's not just a Gashmastic thing, it's a result of the Torah. It comes out that the Rinyan HaMalchus is a hemshech from the Tafk Shel Beis Nagodl. So it comes out the Melech, as much as he is on top, even the later generation, on top of the Beis Nagodl, on top of the Nosi, so he is beyond it, he has his Nesias, but nevertheless, it's a continuation of the Beis. The Beis Nagodl zayin the Amudei Hayroim Hem Chekem Mishpat Yetzel Kol Yisrael. Rambam says that the Beis, what's their job? They are the pillars of Paskening Dinim. All the halachas come out from them to all the Yidden. And the tafkid for Melech is, so now we see how the two work together. The Bezdin is the court with the smartest people knowing the laws come out to tell us what the result of the Torah. And the Melech, his job is, as the Mishpat HaTorah, but the Bezdin, he's supposed to take the laws of Torah that the Bezdin says, his job is to make sure that the people keep it. But Mitzad fighters the din, so it comes that he's to a certain degree based as a result of the Bezdin, because he's supposed to only accomplish to make sure people keep what the Bezdin said, and that's why the din is as mitzvah l'melech ha'chabed le'im. It's a mitzvah on the king to give honor and respect to those that learn Torah. And the Rambam says, if the Sanhedrin or the Chachamim would come into the king, he has to stand up for them. Another thing that says the king is aimed the king Godel, he would stand up in the king Godel. When we would ask on the Urim Betumim and ask questions and would be answered to the Cheshin Urim Betumim, he has to stand. Because the king is a recipient from the Bezdin Godel, from the Chachamim. Now, when the gay to the meaning Hashlita from the Melecham, but concerning the rulership over the people, there's nobody on top of him but the Eibishter. There's nobody higher in his malchus. But the far, therefore, in public, in front of people, he should not stand up in front of anybody. People should see that he's the top authority. He shouldn't even stand up in public, even in front of the Chachamim, because he has to show that he has the complete leadership. But be'emes, his leadership is coming after what the Bezdin says, the Sanhedrin says. High time is Amelech when he sees B'teira, nicht kan zwei besondere Schrores. And therefore, we ask the question, after all, as much as we'll say there are two levels, but there's two separate jobs. But now we see they're not two separate jobs. That they're two separate jobs, and therefore one does not contradict the other, conflict, so why can't you have two? There's a ein hemshech. It's all one continuation. As mentales if you're going to divide it, shnei melachim, because it'll be two with one crown, because the melech, in one way, he's the top, and the Bezdin is lower than him, but the melech has to keep what the Bezdin says. So the whole malchus is a result of the union of the Sanhedrin. And B'meila, that's why if you would have them two people, they're two people. It's the same job given to two people, and that you can't have. The same job can be given to people, even though it's two jobs, but it's in essence one. Now that we understand the difference between Moshe and Yeshua versus the other kings later, the other Nesim later, etc., we'll understand why Yeshua became king without Mashiach like a melech, without anointing of the Mishem and Mishcha, but because of the smicha he got. And smicha was because of his Torah. So the Rebbe explains like this: Bibalda melech is a makabel from the best magodel with gitarus mishpat Torah canal. Since we just said that the melech is the recipient of what the best magodel is, they give the mishpat, and he is supposed to make sure people keep the mishpat. In the full verstanden bin engaged in the seas from Yeshua, but there is a formation. So we understand when it comes to Yeshua, and the same thing would be by Moshe, was said that God bade in the seas. He had both as this. Say a melech and say the seas that the dagger from melech. He was say melech, but he also had the Nesias and Torah in the same level as a melech, because his Nesias and Torah was not part of the Bezin. His, we said before, Nesias but Torah was that he, as an individual, received the Torah like Moshe. So he had the highest level of melech and the highest level of Nesias. Ad Nesias Amluche by him given a hemshech with itself as a Nesias but Torah. So the fact that he's a melech, and since the concept of a melech comes to keep what the Bezin, the Torah says, so by him, his malchus was a result of his being the head of Torah. There were two inyonim they had, but one came as a result of the other. The Seis means like this: Iker inyon is what said is nosi b'Torah. The main thing is that he's a nosi in Torah. That's the first thing. And his Meiser Gans Torah Tzedin, he's the one that gave over the whole Torah. He, as who he is, not as part of the Bezdin, who Yeshua was. And in addition to that, he by him given the Inyan Hamluchev to durchführen the Mishpat HaTorah zwischen Am Yisrael. He also had the Inyan of being a melech in order, and his job was to make sure that what the Torah says will be kept by the people. So the Inyan of Malchus came to him secondary. That first he was the Iker in Torah, and because the Malchus is a result of the Torah, so therefore by Yeshua, what happened was that Yeshua Nesias, the Malchus was as a result of Nesias of Torah. And the Father is Aimini given durch Smicha, and that's why when he was appointed, he was appointed through Smicha, putting his hands on him, not through the Shem and Amish. Why? The Mashiach of the problem is Mataros Atzuf Tinyin Amlucha. The reason why a king has to have Shem and Amish is in order to bring to him, appoint him in the Malchus. Because he's a Melech needs Mashiach. Al derech v'Malchus shol. The Rambam brings a raya that this is supposed to happen, that the king, when he becomes the king, is supposed to have the Shem and Amish from shol. So we see from there that the concept of Mashiach goes for a Melech. A Melech has to have Mashiach. Shenke Malchus Yeshua, the Malchus of Yeshua, which is Neitzer Teni, Yeshua was referred to as the one, the keeper of the figs, the one that is involved in Torah, is Ikra by him. What was his main thing? Nisi is Binyan Torah. His main thing was that he was the Nosi in Torah, und der Riber wird zu aufgetan durch Smicha. And to be the Nosi in Torah, it comes through Smicha. Was ist verbunden mit Torah, Dafke? That's connected to Torah. Dafke ben geht Torah, wer sagt, Smuchim ish mepish. Dafke, when it comes to having a position in Torah, that's where we say you need to have smicha from the one before who had smicha, from the one before going back all the way to Moshe Rabbeinu. So smicha makes you into a person that has an authority in Torah. That's why they write smuchal on it. The lashon the smicha is you shall have the smicha. It's there, and the smicha. So therefore, by Yeshua, since the Inyan of Malchus was because of his main thing of Torah. So when they gave him the Torah, through smicha, he didn't have to have the Mashiach, because the Inyan of Malchus by him was a result of his Torah. So then the Rebbe says, like, Leib der Montebir is echt verstanden, based on what we said before, we'll understand. Ados was a state in Medrash, Shaul given the Melech Rishon, that this that says in Medrash, that Shaul was the first king, is klar nicht considered to them, was gesagt in Rambam, bekam et Rosh Chazal, as Moshe Rabbeinu, but there is a Yeshua, and got it in from Melech. The Rebbe asked Akasha, the Medrash refers to Yeshua as the first king. We just said before, whole thing that Rambam says that we know Yeshua was a king, had the din of a melech. Moshe din of a melech. How does the Medrash say that Yeshua was the first king? Contradiction. So it's now we know it's no contradiction. There are two different types. While the Geder Amlucha from Moshe Yeshua is but another Geder Legamer from Malchus from Shaul David, because the Geder, the concept of what Yeshua and Moshe were kings, was a complete different concept of king as the kingship of Shaul and David. By Moshe and Yeshua is the Nesias Amlucha given a tofel for the Siyus and Betera. Because by Moshe, it was a Malchus. and they were malchus, but it was a result of Torah. But the other malachim later, there were two separate things. So the melech was a melech in his own right, and the one that wasn't Torah was in his own right. And the melech is higher, the other one is lower. But by Meshin, so when it says in Medrash that Yeshua was the first king, in that type of king, Shaul was the first king, that type of kingship. There's another kasha which we could answer. We say there's a din that the melech to become a king has to have the Mashiach of the Shemin HaMishcha, the anointed Shemin HaMishcha. Why doesn't it say in the Torah? The Gemara learns out from different things. Brings. Why doesn't the Torah say? The Chura Tamo is not understood. The Bald meaning melech is a mitzvah ferocious. To become a protein, but since the Torah, it's a clear mitzvah to have a king, and there are details how to do it. But Gedarf Stein in Torah, as I mean, it comes to Shemin HaMishcha. So the Torah should have said that. How do you appoint a king through the Shemin HaMishcha? Al derech ishtei der din from Mashiach's king Godel and Mashiach Mohammed, like it says a din that the king Godel. How do you appoint a king Godel through the Shemin HaMishcha? And Mashiach Muhammad, the general in war, also was called Mashiach Muhammad, had to be anointed with Shemin HaMishcha. The Torah says it. Why doesn't it say in the Torah Melech has to be anointed? Now let's just move him based on what we said before. It's understood. The way Malchus was, the way Lechatchila, the end of Malchus was given in the Torah, was Azez was given, and it only happened at the beginning. But that's the way the Torah set it up, which is the way it was by Moshe, by Mamala became Yeshua by Moshe, and by his successor, which is Yeshua. He's Nanefun as the Melech is Eichanosi B'Torah. The way it was originally set up, that the Melech, as much as he's a Melech in all other Gashmas, in all other things, he's also the Nosi in Torah. And the Nosi, and being the Melech is a result of Torah. And as we said before, if you're being a Malchus, a Melech like Yeshua Moshe came as a result of Torah, you don't become a Melech through Mashiach. That's the Melech part. But if you're already in Torah and that brings the Malchus, your smicha is good enough to make you. So that's what the Torah does, right? Because when the Torah spoke about Malchus, it was speaking about the Malchus the way it was then. Moshe and then even Yeshua. So that's what the Torah doesn't write it. When those is meaning Melech, Dav Zayin, Davka, Shemin HaMishcha, this that lapel, you have to do it with Shemin HaMishcha, but Zuchuv Giton Shpeter, that happened later. When Shaul Gedarf werden der Melech, when Shaul had to be Melech, then a new din came that you have to use the Shemin HaMishcha, but in the Torah it doesn't say it because of that reason. So here we see how everything fits together. The difference of Moshe and Yeshua and the rest, and why Moshe wanted the son to be, because Moshe thought there'll be two people. The Eibishter told him that it goes together with Torah. And why? Because you can't have the two together. And the Rebbe explained the whole Arichas because the way he says, the way that it's supposed to be the Malchus then was together with Torah, so you can't have this, you should have two, so you had only one. Later generations, it was divided into two, but divided into two, that one, but the Melech is higher in Shrora, in Shlita, in control, but the Melech has to listen to Torah. But he's not the highest in Torah. So therefore, you have the highest in Torah and you have the highest in the Melech. But by Moshe and Yeshua, it wasn't like that, that the Malchus came through Torah, therefore it didn't need Shemin HaMishcha.